Beddau is the kind of close-knit Welsh village where life moves at an easy pace and neighbours know each other by name. However, in 2015, that peace was shattered. The discovery of a body near the home of an elderly woman sent shockwaves through the community, transforming the sleepy village into the centre of a chilling mystery. Whispers spread quickly through the streets as residents struggled to comprehend how something so dark could have been hidden for so long, right in their midst. In November 2015, two friends, Michelle James and Ryan Leigh, made their way into the garden of the Tremacum Flats, intended to unwrap what they thought was a medical skeleton, something left behind for a harmless joke. But as they sliced into the package, an unpleasant stench filled the air, and a strange liquid seeped out. It was in that moment the laughter faded, replaced by a chilling realization that what lay inside was no prank at all, but human remains. Moments later, they called the police. Michelle explained to authorities that her neighbour, Sabine, who died a month earlier in October of 2015 of cancer at the age of 74, told her that the vacuum-packed package contained a medical skeleton. It was also stated that Leigh also left several possessions to her neighbours. Very little was known about Sabine, an eccentric woman who often shared colourful but unverified tales of her life with neighbours. Mary Gardner, a former acquaintance, described Leigh as an enigmatic figure who often kept people at a distance, revealing very little about her life. Many were intrigued by her accent, which was described as peculiar, with a slight twang of a New Zealand accent. Her home was almost entirely bare of personal photographs, except for a single black and white image of her performing as a nightclub singer in Australia. Leigh offered conflicting accounts of her past. To some, she claimed she had left a violent and unfaithful husband in New Zealand before moving to Wales, where a women's charity helped rehouse her. To others, she said her husband had abandoned her. In truth, Leigh and John Sabine had married in 1960, eventually raising 5 children together, though their relationship began under unusual circumstances. They first met in a London hospital when Leigh was 17 and John, who was an accountant and Korean War veteran, was 29 and already married with 2 children. When Leigh fell pregnant, the couple ran away together. In 1969, John and Leigh Sabine left their 5 children at a daycare in Auckland, New Zealand, with the promise of returning. However, they never came back. The children, the eldest being 11-year-old Susan and the youngest being 2-year-old Leanne, were thrust into a turbulent childhood, spending the next decade drifting through foster homes, facing instability, abuse, and the lingering sense of rejection that would haunt them for years. Meanwhile, their parents had moved to Australia, chasing Leigh's dreams of a cabaret career, leaving their children to navigate the emotional fallout of abandonment. The story captured national attention in New Zealand, and when the Sabines resurfaced in the early 1980s claiming they intended to reunite the family, hope briefly flickered. Leigh told the Auckland Star that she and John had only recently earned enough to return to New Zealand and had been eager to reunite with their children. However, her story was soon challenged. People who knew the couple in the early 1970s came forward, revealing that they'd been living under the surname Martin at the southern tip of the North Island, contradicting Leigh's version of events. In 1984, Leigh and John soon expelled their 2 youngest children from the family home, and 19-year-old Jane faced arrest over alleged abuse, with Leigh expecting to testify as the key witness. However, the case collapsed when the crucial witness disappeared. Just weeks later, John and Leigh told neighbours they were heading on a holiday up north, but once again, they never came back, abandoning their children for a second time. The following year, the couple reappeared in the United Kingdom, eventually settling in Beddau in 1997, taking their eldest son, Marty, with them. In Sky's documentary, The Body Next Door, it was stated that Marty was empathetic towards his parents and hopeful that one day they would all be a family again. However, as time passed, he sadly realised that his dream would never become a reality. Following his move to the UK, Marty never saw his siblings again. Leigh and John's choice of Beddau as a location to settle in seemed odd to some, and it later emerged that Leigh was not, as she had long claimed, originally from New Zealand. In truth, Leigh was born in Wales and endured her own traumatic childhood, abandoned by her mother and passed between relatives and state-run care homes. Many have been and remain perplexed by how someone who experienced such profound neglect could later abandon her own children in a similar manner. For the Sabine children, the wounds of these repeated abandonments ran deep. The second rupture in 1984 finally reached a breaking point when Jane, one of the daughters, confronted her mother about the initial desertion and spoke publicly about the pain it had caused, exposing the lasting scars that the family's fractured past had left on all of them. Leigh never provided an explanation to the children as to why both she and John abandoned them. In November of 2015, a pathologist determined that the remains found in Wales, tightly encased in layers of carpet and plastic up to 8 inches thick, had likely been there for only a matter of weeks or months. Examination revealed the body belonged to a man in his 40s whose life had ended violently from severe blunt force injuries. The remains were still dressed in pyjamas bearing a St. Michael label, a line last sold by retailer Marks & Spencer in 2000. This surprised investigators, as the remains were subsequently determined to be much older than previously estimated. Investigators attempted to identify the body through dental records and the serial number on a hip replacement, reaching out to local hospitals and surgeries for matches, but their efforts yielded no leads. Lynn Williams, Leigh's carer, chillingly revealed in Sky Crime's documentary The Body Next Door that, quote, Leigh was always talking about a medical skeleton. On numerous occasions, she wanted it moved, and I would be like, oh gosh, I really haven't got time to do things like that. We were sitting around the table having a cup of tea when she mentioned the skeleton again, and I said, well, I hope it's not a bleeding real one. And she went, you never know, Lynn. Leigh also told a local hairdresser shortly before her death, quote, people are going to talk about me after I have gone. I could be famous. The hairdresser asked her why, with Leigh replying with, quote, because of the body in the bag. Neighbour Michelle James was initially brought into custody under suspicion of being involved, and footage showed she was visibly distressed by the experience. Police found no evidence to link her to the crime, and subsequently released her and cleared her of any involvement. Michelle faced harassment from locals who accused her of being a murderer, leading the council to rehouse her. She now lives a more isolated life, separated from the friends she once had in the village, and has been diagnosed with PTSD as a result of the traumatic events she experienced. Focus shifted to Leigh's husband, John, who had not been seen since signing the lease on the Beddau flat in February 1997. John had registered with the local GP and was due to pick up his repeat prescription in April, however he never did. Leigh maintained that he had left her for another woman and began a new life elsewhere. In 2000, during a phone call with her daughter, Jane, Leigh disclosed that John had died, but did not elaborate further. Shortly after her husband vanished, Leigh entered a stormy relationship with retired fireman Derek Ellis, who briefly moved into her home. There were rumours that Ellis had also gone missing after their split, but his daughter later confirmed that he had passed away in 2010 from alcoholic liver disease. Leigh's neighbours in Wales reported that despite the fact she had children, she never once mentioned them. She appeared to completely despise them. In 2014, Leigh sent a letter to her daughter, Jane, alongside a picture of a phoenix. The letter read, quote, "Like the phoenix, I will arise from the ashes, and sleep will obey me, and visit thee never. For my eyes are upon thee, for ever and ever. I have served my life sentence of shame and blame. Now it is your turn to do the same. Your nemesis, Anne Leigh Sabine." In a significant breakthrough, DNA testing confirmed that the remains found outside the flat in Beddau belonged to 67-year-old John Sabine, matching a son he had from a previous relationship in England. The revelation came as a profound shock to the Sabine children, who had been unaware that they had two half-siblings through their father. Investigators also discovered a hair embedded within the layers of wrapping around the body, which was identified as Leigh's, immediately placing her under suspicion. One of Leigh Sabine's acquaintances, Valerie Chalkley, testified that in a 1997 phone conversation, Leigh had allegedly admitted to killing John, claiming she had done it, quote, "with a frog." However, Chalkley admitted she was never entirely certain whether Leigh was speaking truthfully, given her tendency for dramatic and exaggerated claims, especially regarding her aspirations as a cabaret singer. Forensic pathologist Dr. Richard Jones determined that John Sabine had died from blunt force trauma to the head. The injuries and Valerie Chalkley's testimony corresponded precisely with a heavy stone frog the couple kept by their bed, its protruding eye and hind leg aligning with the fractures. The stone frog was found in the property of a neighbour who Leigh had left possessions to. This discovery helped investigators confirm that the frog was indeed the murder weapon. Dr. Jones also noted that the body had been meticulously wrapped, which resulted in remarkable preservation through a form of what's called chemical mummification. The remarkable preservation was so thorough that toxicology tests could still reveal details about John's final hours, showing he had consumed alcohol before his death, though not enough to exceed the legal drink-drive limit. Even at the time his remains were found, he remained listed on the electoral roll as residing at the property. His pension had also continued to be collected for years after he vanished. Coroner Andrew Barclay of the Glamorgan Valleys concluded the inquest by recording a verdict of unlawful killing. He noted there was no documented history of domestic violence and no evidence to suggest that Leigh Sabine had acted in self-defence. The circumstances surrounding John Sabine's death will never completely be known, and it remains a mystery as to why Leigh killed him. She took all her secrets to the grave, never facing justice for her crimes. Sky's documentary, The Body Next Door, explores the trauma endured by the Sabine siblings and how the events deeply affected their lives. Heartbreakingly, Marty Sabine died in February of 2000 at the age of 35, having taken his own life. As well as finding out about two half-siblings, the Sabines also discovered a cousin of their mother's who resides in Wales. In a 2016 interview with The Guardian, Jane shared that discovering these newfound family connections offered a small but meaningful sense of hope. She expressed a wish to travel to the UK to meet her newfound family, hoping to find some measure of happiness despite the shadows of their troubled past.